I have to say that one of the greatest privileges that I have in my life is the friendship of the remarkable Ambassador Ken Salazar, who will be our keynote speaker today. And I first met Ken in 1987 when he was serving as the chief legal counsel for Colorado Governor Roy Romer, and then he was appointed by Governor Romer as the executive director of the Department of Natural Resources, where he played a really pivotal role in reforming the operations of oil, mining, and natural gas production in Colorado to ensure the protection of the environment. And while he was in that role, you'll hear this name again in a different forum. He helped create one of our most precious resources in Colorado for the environment, and that's the Great Outdoors Colorado Amendment that raises resources, millions and millions of dollars each year through the Colorado Lottery for the protection and development of open space parks and trails in Colorado. I have admired him from the very first day I met him. Ken has a long history of involvement in the politics of our state of Colorado, and I've been involved in politics most of my life, and I consider Ken one of those rare political leaders whom I would follow anywhere. And I've had the privilege of following him in many roles that he has taken as a consummate public servant and leader. He spent 6 years as the Attorney General of Colorado, strengthening sex assault laws and continuing in his efforts to protect Colorado's environment. In 2005, he was persuaded to run for a U.S. Senate seat that was being vacated by Senator Ben Nighthorse Campbell. I remember having a conversation with Ken in his office saying, "But Ken, you need to be the governor of Colorado." And Ken said, "No, this is the right thing and the right time for me." And I'm so glad I was wrong about that, and that Ken went on to serve for 6 years in the United States Senate. He took his trademark cowboy hat with him to the Senate, where he was recognized across the country for his really thoughtful and strategic leadership, and a guy who knew how to roll up his sleeves, bring people together, and solve problems for our nation. Our president, Barack Obama, recognized the tremendous leadership of Ken Salazar when he asked him to come and join him as the Secretary of the Interior in 1999. And the list is long of the accomplishments, and it doesn't, the accomplishments are wonderful, and you don't see in those the extraordinary battles that he faced while serving as Secretary of the Interior to get things done for all of us, for the environment in our nation. But he focused on establishing wilderness areas and defining what they were in various parts of our country. Again, recognizing, as we all do today, even then, the urgency of protecting so many wonderful threatened spaces. He was, as Secretary of the Interior, he took his experiences in Colorado with the Great Outdoors Colorado Act and created, along with many wonderful congressional leaders, the Great American Outdoors Act, something that those of us who've been involved in parks and open space had worked for years to get federal funding for our national parks and all of our state and local parks throughout the nation. He continued to work on renewable energy and how to sensitively involve that industry sector in the use of our public lands. And one thing that I think I'm most proud of, something that Ken has championed in every role that he has played about inclusiveness. We've had a lot of conversation about that, and we've heard it here this morning from everyone about the commitment to inclusiveness, from First Nations to every community and nationality and race and ethnicity in North America and in the United States. He championed the national parks and monuments and the names and the preservation of these places to ensure that tribal and minority communities were included in those efforts. And so when we're working to involve in the community that I grew up in, Denver, we sit nestled below the most beautiful mountain range that many of you know as well, the Rocky Mountains. And in my own neighborhood, I knew classmates who'd never been to the mountains, lived in this beautiful state and didn't know anything and had never visited these amazing places. And so as we work to change that and to involve all Coloradans in the outdoors and in the beauty and in their responsibility and love of nature, it takes a champion like that to set the pace and to set the standard for making sure that when we see the work, when we see the mountains and when we see our places, that we see ourselves in them. And Ken did that for all of us. He comes from a very large family of 7 brothers and sisters and parents who instilled in him the value of hard work, being inclusive, the golden rule, and Ken has carried with him those values that he learned working on the ranch and in the farming in the San Luis Valley of Colorado to every role that he has played in leadership over the years. So it is my tremendous delight and honor to introduce you to Ambassador Ken Salazar. Oh. And just when I talked about his trademark cowboy hat, he comes with a baseball cap.
Hey, how about Allegra Happy Haynes on this beautiful morning? Give her a round of applause. You know, she talks about 1987 like it was yesterday, and so many ways it is, but we have come a long ways. So thank you, Happy, and thank you to all of you who are here. You know, what I want to do this morning is really talk to you all about how the fact that we are one North America, somos familia, una familia, no tres familias. And that means everybody. It means those who have been here for time immemorial, our indigenous tribes and our native families. It means those on both sides of the border, because after all, borders are simply political lines. But wildlife knows things are a little different. And I know it's a time of concern and, in fact, consternation because of what you see happening around the world. You know, withdrawals from Paris Climate Accords, defunding of public lands initiatives in my own country. So you see all of that. And so as I was coming here this morning, I was talking to Leslie, and I was saying, hey, what is it that you want me to say? She says, well, give us some hope. So I want to do that. I want to give you some hope. Because times are difficult, yes, and you have to acknowledge those things. But then you have to look back in history to where we have been and where we have come. It was, after all, a Republican president by the name of Richard Nixon who brought in, through the laws he signed, the Air Quality Act, Clean Water Act, and essentially the environmental framework that we worked on in our country. It was at a different time and on a different issue, but still a social justice issue where if you were of a certain color or if you were a woman, you didn't have the right to vote. And so for my time as Secretary of Interior, one of the things that I valued the most was a lesson that I learned from a great senator from Hawaii Asian American, Japanese American by the name of Danny Inouye. He said to me, Ken, Barack Obama's offered you to take this position as Secretary of Interior. I'm not sure that Happy Tom or Nita would want you to do that. But he said, you know what? As Secretary of the Interior for the United States of America, you're the custodian of America's natural resources, but you're also the custodian of America's heritage. And he said, frankly, the United States has not done a good job in lifting up the heritage part of it. And so we set about creating the Harriet Tubman National Monumental Park in Maryland, Cesar Chavez, the 400th unit of the National Park in La Paz, California, lifting up indigenous places and making sure that First Nations and their people and Alaska Natives were heard throughout the country. On our National Mall in Washington, D.C., there is what we call the most visited place in America. 30 million plus visitors a year. And yet, when we got there, Barack Obama and I in 2009, there was no depiction or celebration of the contributions of women, Native Americans, Mexican Americans, African Americans, or anybody else, except white men, wonderful people like Abraham Lincoln and others who were rightfully celebrated. But we came in and we said we're going to change that. And so today, we have a Martin Luther King Jr. National Memorial on the National Mall. And we have the Sewell Belmont House, which recognizes the contributions of women and the suffrage movement in the United States. So you think back to those days, and we have come a long ways. You know, the Dr. Martin Luther King Memorial, which I had the honor of working with Dr. King's family and those who were moving forward that foundation, has a theme that was taken out of the I Have a Dream speech. It says, out of a mountain of despair came a stone of hope. Out of a mountain of despair came a stone of hope. Well, I heard and re-listened again to that famous speech by Dr. King. And that's kind of the time that we're in. You know, it's kind of desperate and times of despair. So we got to find hope. And we find that hope here. We find that hope here through Colorado State University and the great leadership of Chancellor Tony Frank and his staff, and the leadership of Leslie Heron and all the staff who was here, and the people who have been associated with this center from its very beginning. So I want to start talking about kind of where I come from. Yesterday was the first day I get on a plane since January the 7th of this year. I resigned my role as United States Ambassador to Mexico on January the 7th. In some ways, I felt like we had accomplished a lot. In some ways, I felt like we had a long ways to go. But we had become, in that time that I served as U.S. Ambassador, with the help of USMCA and the relationships that we have among our people, the #1 trading partners in the entire world and in the history of humanity. And I used to say, when you look at Canada and you look at the United States, there's only one way to go, and that's forward. You have 330 million citizens in the United States, Americans. You have 50 million or so here in Canada, or 40 million. You have about 130 million in Mexico. It's about 500 million people. The strongest economies in the entire world. The best science and the best research, the greatest universities like here at UBC. And so the integration of North America and the transformation of the relationship is what drove me in what was one of the chapters that I've had in my public life. That is that we are one family in North America, and we need to work on the challenges that we face together. And that borders, the border between the United States and Mexico, the border between the United States and Canada, ought to be transformed in a new relationship. And you see that very clearly when we talk about environmental issues. Somos familia. Now, for me as ambassador to Mexico, I worked a lot on environmental issues, worked a lot on security issues, dealing with cartels and fentanyls and gun runners. I dealt a lot with immigration and the movement of some 30 million people across the Western Hemisphere. And for all of those things, we have solutions. But the one thing that's clear, the solutions only come when you have respect for each other, no matter where you're from, and where you understand the history of the three countries. So North American integration has been and still is my North Star. We learned that very clearly from the pandemic. Where would we want to put our future in whose hands? Is it our continent or is it places far across the world? We learned it in the national security aspect when we dealt with 9/11 and we dealt with Afghanistan and other issues. Where does our national security come from? What's most important? It's our neighbors. It's our neighbors. And so yes, when Joe Biden called me one day, he said, Ken, I know you want a job because you've already been secretary and you've done these things, but there's one that you might want to do. He said, would you be interested in being ambassador to Mexico? And I said, yes. But I said, only if we can transform the relationship. So what does transformation of a relationship mean to me? And I speak about this as a Mexican American. What it means to me is that we lift up people on both sides of the border, US-Mexico, but necessarily Canada as well, because that's what takes us to really being one community and one people. So I'll say it in Spanish, somos familia. And this CSU center that has been created now, I think now in the 8th or 9th year, 6th International Symposium, it is good, as Happy said, that we're here in Canada, because it punctuates the fact that we are one family. So for all those who are from Canada, please stand up. Let me just get a sense of how many of you are from like Canada? Canadians. Tom Goujon, these are real Canadians. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you for opening up your doors. Oh, all right, how many from Mexico? I know there's a few from Mexico somewhere. Que viva México! México lindo y bonito! Precioso! How many from the United States? All right, the United States of America, we're still in there. Tom Goujon. All right, Happy Haynes, Leslie. Well, let me just say, it is to me, just to be heartwarming to see us together. Tres naciones, pero un continente. Un mundo, mucha gente y muchas naciones, but we're in this together. Somos una familia. I took some of the lessons of my life as Secretary of Interior and U.S. Senator and the other roles that Happy described, also to Mexico. And there, I'm going to give you just two examples of the kinds of things that really have to do a lot with transboundary issues, climate, and conservation. One of them was right along the Guatemala border, Chiapas and Campeche, those states, the southeastern part of Mexico on the peninsula. And you got to think that it is the second largest carbon sink in the Western Hemisphere next to the Amazon. And so one of the goals and vision that we had was that we would work with the governments of Guatemala and Mexico and the state governments to create a crown jewel of conservation in the Yucatan Peninsula. Now, wasn't that there was that much attention from the United States or even Canada on the Yucatan. There were some in Mexico, Fondo Mexicano. Some of the great folks who are here who care about conservation, who recognized that the Selva Maya had the qualities of celebration for what our planet is all about. It is these states where if you go to Campeche or to Chiapas, it's 90% Mayan Indians. They have been there since way before Hernán Cortés came in 1519. They have been there forever in their way of life. If you go to Campeche, as I often did, there is a home of the jaguar, the home of the cougar, the home of certain species that you only see in that particular place. And there are ejidos, there are places where the common people live there and make a living off the land. What they do is they sell what they have around the cenotes to make a living. And so when I met with them, there's an ejido by the name of Miguel Colorado, kind of like Colorado happy. Miguel Colorado, I said to them, how many of you live here? It's about 1,400 people. How big is your commons, your ejido? About 75,000 acres. I said, well, that's about as big as some of our national parks in the United States. But I don't know of anything in the United States, actually not even in Canada, where you'd have the cenotes, where you'd have the jaguar, where you have the avian species that are there, where you'd have a population that is 90% Mayan. And so what do? We took action, not that we had the authority, not that Joe Biden or the White House or anybody was saying, Mr. Salazar, little old ambassador down in Mexico, do this. But we said, this is a place that is worth lifting up and saving and helping the people, addressing the issue of climate and deforestation, and making sure, in addition, that we are working on the development sustainably in Guatemala and in southeastern Mexico. Because if you think about what has rocked the politics of America, Canada, United States, the issue of migration and the flows from countries like Nicaragua, Venezuela, other places to the north. Well, you start thinking about sustainable development. Where are those curtains of prosperity? How do we create opportunities for everyone? So I'm proud to say that some of those projects, I'm sure, will continue. Not necessarily because they're getting any help from Washington, D.C. these days, because as many of you know, USAID is kind of being put on the chopping block, and they were one of the funders. But there's a lot of nonprofits that are involved, and the ideas are there. Interestingly, when I first decided to convene a meeting of the folks in that part of Mexico, I said, I got to do it with the governors, state level. And I got to try to bring in the federal government as well. My friends from Mexico know and will remember well Andrés Manuel López Obrador. So I went to the Palacio and I said, you're from Tabasco. You're born right outside Palenque. I want us to work on this together. I said, ask one of your people to go down with me. And he said, okay. So we had a meeting with the 7 governors. We actually ended up having 9 meetings. Kind of like if you think about this symposium and the number of people who are here, think about 1,000 people just like this, with the governors all up here, all talking about saving the Selva Maya, ending deforestation, creating sustainable opportunity for the people who live there, and wanting to create an organization to keep it going. And then Fondo Mexicano, some of the most wonderful people in the world. We think sometimes in the US about the Nature Conservancy and the Trust for Public Lands, and you know them all. Wonderful organizations, I love them all, TRCP. But these guys are the ones stepping up at the table, investing. And we hope at the end of the day, it's also a little bit about money, right? But, okay, check this out. Not necessarily about conservation, happy, but it is a little bit. That Mexico, for the first time in the history of all of North America, has a woman as president. Has a woman as president. And she's a climate scientist. And she cares about conservation. And we had conversations with her about this. Now, I don't know your new minister, Prime Minister Cardin here in Canada, but it would be good for you to sit down with him. British Columbia is pretty good. I knew Justin Trudeau a little bit, and Jolie and other folks in his government, but it's a new time. And so the examples in both places can help us in the United States, because whatever setbacks we end up having, the fight goes on, because these issues are just so important. I will tell you the Selva Maya, I think, is going to be, and I hope it will be, one of the great examples of what we can do. You hear a lot, you know, I don't know if there'll be any, the COPs will continue. I think we had COP28 this last year. The US may not be there, we'll see. But the fact is that they've been going on for a long time. And the people who started it didn't know that one day they would bring the world together. My own view is they've done some great things. There's a lot more that they have to do. But I'll give you one other example because it has to do with the transboundary to the north. So I go to Laredo, Nuevo Laredo, right at the very southern tip of Texas, where you have about 40% of the commerce from Mexico to the US and about 40% of the commerce from the US to Mexico passing through that port of entry. I go to a bank at Laredo, and a guy there by the name of Jerry Swindle is looking out, and he says, I said, well, there's a border. He said, yeah. I said, it looks very different on the US side and on the Mexican side. On the US side, shopping center, developed and nice. I said, look at the other side of the river, abandoned. I'd been down there with the Border Patrol on a boat earlier in the day. It's a place where human smugglers come and dump people into the river, charging them anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000 to try to get them to this side of the river. It's a lawless land on the Nuevo Laredo side. So I said, why don't we pull together an effort that brings both communities together? I said, you're a banker and you make a lot of money. You're the second or third largest bank in Texas. Put some money up for a planner. I said, there was a young man by the name of Federico Peña with key people like Tom Goujon and Happy Haynes did kind of this thing in Denver where they redeveloped the river. You think of the Rio Grande, tall fences, barbed wire, lawless land. And the president of the bank said, well, we never thought about that. Can we do it? So we did. We got the mayor of Laredo, Nuevo Laredo. We hired a great consultant. And they came up with a 10-mile river development project that was binational. Now, Texas is a little funny, so they didn't like the term national park, binational park, but they're okay with a binational river project. Isn't that looking at the border a little different? A place where you have development on both sides, where communities can come together, where you can do the right kind of security with technology. Some of those projects still along our 2,000-mile border are still alive and well. And I hope that they will continue over time to show that you can have security and you can have modern borders and environmental friendly borders. I was thinking about the border. I know I don't have that much time. I could give you a speech about Mexico. But I think about how now all the pollution that comes from cars that are waiting in Tijuana and Brownsville, Juarez, sitting there for hours and hours, crossing back and forth. What does that do to our environment? I think about the Tijuana River that's been dumping untreated sewage into the Pacific Ocean that then makes its way north in the Pacific so that the beaches along Imperial Beach and others have had to be closed for much of the year. I think about the Colorado River, and I think about the Rio Grande River, about how those shared great rivers can create opportunity. Had a lot of stories about things that we have done. You know, back in my time as Interior Secretary, we signed Minute 319 and started the pulsation flows of the Colorado River into the Colorado River Delta. The Colorado River Delta basically dies at the border. But since that started some 15 years ago, the Delta is back. I was there on a boat, on a kayak, and the people who are making it happen are the people who live there locally because they see the greatness of that river and the restoration of the Delta. So lots of examples. So I want to just say, you know, this is, I think, my first time I make a public presentation fact, sure outside of the country since I left as ambassador. But it's good to do it here because it's good to see friends from Mexico, friends from Canada, and friends of the United States who have hope that we can and will do better for our planet. And that's going to mean that our efforts, instead of taking a step back, we have to take 2 steps forward. We have to be more courageous, and we have to keep going, doing what we know we have to do. I want to comment just very quickly about the Center for North American Conservation, the Salazar Center, as they call it. And by the way, if anybody wants to take the name off of it, you should do it. But let me just say when we first started this, I had been Secretary of Interior, and I'd been United States Senator. I came back, I sat down with Tony Frank, and I said, so what we ought to do is we ought to have a center, a clearinghouse, where the best ideas on conservation ought to come together. Because every time you're a town, you're Denver, or you're Vancouver, or you're St. Louis, or you're the large landscapes of the crown of the continent, every time you're going to try to do a conservation initiative, you ask yourself, well, where do I go? Well, I ran the Department of Interior. I had 72,000 people working for me. And I know we didn't have anything like that. That basically said, here's some ideas, here's where you go. So the idea was, let's get a center created that has the best ideas, And so, as time evolved, I think there were 5 areas, substantive areas, that became, to me, very important. One were the large landscapes. Some of them you celebrate today here with the Peregrine Falcon, the Accelerator program. But for me, they were the crown of the continent, which was transboundary. For me, it was the deserts of Arizona and Sonora, which looked the same on one side of the border or the other. For me, they were the large landscapes of the headwaters of the Everglades in Florida, or the North Woods of Maine and Canada. Those were large landscapes. Now, there was a time, because we pushed it hard, the National Conservation Cooperatives, NCCs, National Landscape Conservation Cooperatives. I know we're still here, we're still alive, but when this administration was in the last time around, they cut the funding, but there were 22 of them. 22 of them just in the US, some of them transboundary. Those need to be brought back somehow. Those ideas are time tested. So large landscapes, what are they? What are the most important ones? If it's North America, I would ask you for Mexico to put the Selva Maya on there. I would ask to put the Sonoran Desert on there. I would think that maybe what used to be called the Gulf of Cortez, now the Gulf of California, el Golfo de California, that it could be the aquarium of the world. You think about the connection of people in Phoenix and Tucson down to that whole area around Baja. You think about the dolphins and the whales and the rest of the species that live in that place. That can be done. I think here in Canada, Waterton, all of the great landscapes of the Rockies, those that connect up to the North Woods of Maine, some of which will be talked about here today, I think, there's the same kind of opportunity there. Let me also say, cities. Happy was right, we were talking about, when I was Secretary of Interior, I went to New York and LA and about every city you can think of in America, all 50 states many times. And I remember sitting down with Mayor Bloomberg in New York, and I said, what do you do with the 10 national units of the national park that you have right here? He said, well, they do their own thing, and we do our own thing, and we run the harbor, et cetera. I said, so today, because of a local unit led by a city, New York City, the National Park Service, signed an agreement where they basically are sharing resources on the protection of Jamaica Bay, on taking kids from schools that are underserved black, brown, other nationalities, to experience what it's like to spend an outdoor night of camping. That's happening in New York. In St. Louis, an example that I've shared with many of you before, I remember going there with Senator Claire McCaskill. She said, Ken, I'm up for re-election, I need a little help. And the arch at St. Louis, the Gateway Arch, has a little rust and it's leaking. So I went. Well, you had the Mississippi River, the third largest river in the world, right next to it. You had the arch and you had the Dred Scott Courthouse, all divided by an interstate, I-70, not connected at all. So what happened? I said to the Danforth Foundation and to the mayor and to her and to the governor, you guys got to come together and dream some big dreams here. So 2 years ago, I think, some $1 billion later, it's all connected. The city of St. Louis with 2 million people, access to the river. The Mississippi River connected up to the arch. The arch, now you can walk from there over to the Dred Scott Courthouse, which is where the trial that upheld segregation was held in 1857. All connected at one place because of local community action. Local community action. So I could talk about LA and I could talk about other cities, I could talk about Denver, but important to think about cities because that's where the vast majority of our population lives. Third, climate. So large landscapes, urban projects of development, climate, not gonna go away. Fires, droughts, all the tumult that you see from California to Florida, to the Yucatan, to Newfoundland, to many places in Canada. It's not going to go away. You know, there may be this process to try to withdraw the United States from the Paris Climate Accord, but the fact that you have 100+ countries all coming around the table and saying, we got to do something about this. That's important, that's not going to go away because science tells us that our planet has a fever. Our planet is warming. And if we care about our grandchildren, then we got to make sure that we take care of this place we have home. So climate's not going to go away. Our transboundary, I don't know where all this is going to go. It's very interesting, the disparate treatment of the Canadian-US border and the Mexican-US border. But I've been there through the Senate with people like John McCain and Ted Kennedy trying to get it right. We have an opportunity in North America to create modern borders that provide us security, but also to create more environmentally friendly borders that will allow the flow of commerce and familia one way and the other. So hopefully that will continue to be a high priority. And finally, diversity. Happy mentioned it. I was Director of Natural Resources in 1990, and I was summoned by the environmental leaders of Colorado to a meeting in Boulder because they weren't sure they wanted to confirm me. Or wanted to support my confirmation. They saw me as a Mexican-American from this rural place in the San Luis Valley, Conejos County, a settlement called Los Rincones. And what did I know? The cattle rancher. And so they weren't sure they were going to support me. So I went up there, Boulder, Environmental Defense Fund, all the organizations were there. And I looked around the table and they peppered me with questions for about 2 hours. At the end of that I said, well, let's work on something together. Why don't you help me put together a conference to bring Black and Brown and Native Americans together so that everybody is at the table? They agreed to do that. They didn't support my confirmation, although they supported me a lot later on. Well, we did Great Outdoors Colorado and other things. But we had a meeting at the Arapahoe Community College in Arapahoe County where we brought people together to say, how can we make sure that everybody's at the table? So today I'm proud when I see someone like Nita Gonzalez and her people who are here, who worked on the Colorado River for so long, because there was a time when if you were different, you weren't at the table. And that's very true of the environmental community. You gotta say it as it is. And so one of the great things about the center that I'm very proud of is that we're lifting up diversity. You know, when Barack Obama asked me, he said, Ken, you know, you got a big-time job as a US Senator. You were 100 and I was 99, he said. And you're a better basketball player than me, he said. But I want you to come and be Secretary of Interior. I said, well, but what are we going to do? And he said, we're going to lift up the nation's first peoples, the nation's first Americans. So the tribal conferences at the White House, the settlement of the Cobell litigation, a lot of different things that we did while I was Secretary of Interior, that has to continue. So I'm very proud, Leslie, of this center and what it's doing to lift up diverse voices. And let me finish there and just say, it is the first time I think the center, as Happy said, comes out of our home place of Colorado. But to be here and to see so many from Canada, our wonderful friends from Mexico, really is inspiring. And so I hope at the end of the day, you live here inspired that the journey continues. As Dr. King used to say, the arc of the moral universe bends toward justice, although it is long. So the arc of the moral universe, you can imagine that, is long, but it bends towards justice. And that's what you're all about. Thank you all very much.
Any burning questions for, I will tell you that now you know why, when I said I'll follow you anywhere, and when those of us who were convened, because Ken likes to convene different people, when he convened us all to talk about the Salazar Center and his vision for a North America as one family, we couldn't say no. Okay. Any questions? Yep.
Thank you so much, Mr. Salazar, for your Mexican friend. Thank you so much for your words. It's really an honor to get to know you in person after so many years of working with the U.S. on binational issues. The institution that you mentioned is an institution that was born in 1993, 1994, thanks to the support from USAID. So it was an incredible experience that allowed us to set a full framework for conservation in Mexico. So we are still working on that. Fondo Mexicano is doing a great job, and now I retired 5 years ago, and now we are continuing the work. And I want to also say that now we have a great opportunity in northern Mexico. We're putting together a 7 million hectare conservation project that will unite both borders in the 5 states of northern Mexico. So your words were very inspiring and will keep us working on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And there was one right over here. One more question.
What? You just say who you are. Yeah, well, I'm Lorenzo Rosenzweig from Mexico, former CEO of Fondo Mexicano, and currently I work from another organization that has been supported by the Salazar Center from the beginning, which is Terra Habitus. So we're very happy to be here. And now I have the pleasure of having been invited to be part of the advisory board of the advisory board of Salazar Center. Thank you very much.
Yeah. One more question right over here.
Where? Sorry.
I think it's working. There we go. Dominic De La Sala from the U.S. Worked on a lot of national monument campaigns, including when you were secretary. And now we're facing the prospect of de-gazetting monuments in the U.S., which is unprecedented, as you know, in terms of the use of the Antiquities Act. So I wonder if you have any advice and where you think this is going to wind up, if it indeed will reach the Supreme Court and affect the Antiquities Act for future presidents.
So thank you, Dominic. So 2 quick responses. So one, The Sonoran Desert Initiative with the 5 states is a tremendous opportunity, and that's how we show that the work continues. I am actually been invited to go meet with the governor of Sonora and the governor of Arizona for a summit on the Arizona-Sonora relationship that they're having here at the end of June. So I'm going to continue to push those sorts of things because I think they're very important, and they show the other side of what we're all about, which is trying to build up these relationships. The Sonoran Desert is no different on one side of the border or the other. So I'm proud of the work that you've done, Lorenzo. And the Fondo, I'm sure, has a very, very bright future, but thank you for doing that. On the Antiquities Act, Dominic, number one, it obviously is going to get litigated all the way to the Supreme Court. It is amazing to me that Pelican Island was born out of the conversation with Teddy Roosevelt, where he was asked what he could do, and he said, all you got to do is proclaim it, sign it, and he did. Well, now there are 987 567, I think, national wildlife refuges, all the monuments that I'm sure you have been involved in. And in all of those cases, they become great things. You know, I think about well, lots of examples, but the San Juan Islands. You know, we made a monument under Obama. You were partly involved in some of that. But I remember having a meeting with about 1,000 people, and I asked the question, how many of you want this monument to happen? 1,000 hands went up in the air. Same thing happened in the Rio Grande del Norte in New Mexico, in Taos, New Mexico. I was there with 2 US senators, and I asked the same question at the end of a 2-hour meeting. All the hands went up. So the people who are closest to those monuments should and will play a significant role in fighting back. The Antiquities Act is used only for the most special places, and that's what we try to do. The natural places like San Juan Islands, but they have history. But then places like Cesar Chavez. You know, one of my most wonderful personal memories was working with Cesar's family and his wife, and then standing there at the burial place of Cesar Chavez at the headquarters of the United Farm Workers of America with Barack Obama, and having Barack proclaim that this burial place in the history of the farm workers was a national monument. So I think we'll keep working it, Don't give up. Thank you very much.